It has been called one of the most beautiful train rides in the world, and it's easy to see why. Classic narrow-gauge steam locomotives pull vintage passenger coaches painted in aspen gold and Tuscan red through 45 miles of the most rugged and beautiful country in North America. This 3-foot narrow-gauge railroad was spiked down between 1881 and 1882 by the Denver and Rio Grande to tap the riches of the remote mining town of Silverton. It has been in operation ever since. Today, the riches are found in the incredible scenery and history that lives along the Animas River as it winds through the Rocky Mountains. And this historic railroad takes you there. Three types of steam locomotives power trains on this line, including Alco K-28s built in 1923. Baldwin K-36s from 1925. And the biggest engine on the line, Old 493. A standard gauge locomotive rebuilt in 1928 by the Denver and Rio Grande Western as a K-37. New in Durango are the former White Pass and Yukon diesels built by Montreal Locomotive Works in 1969. Durango is the hub of operations for the railroad, and the roundhouse and shops are where all of this late 19th and early 20th century equipment is kept alive. Ride the rails with us as we take you through the incredibly scenic Animas Canyon, including the railroad's crown jewel, the High Line. See the railroad hauling logs for a wintertime fire mitigation project spearheaded by the Colorado State Forest Service. Photo freights are cool, but check this out. Experience a true American treasure as we explore today's Durango and Silverton. On August 1, 1876, Colorado became the 38th state in the Union in a proclamation signed by President Ulysses S. Grant. Along with statehood came the need for a railroad that could tame the rugged Rocky Mountains. Enter a 3-foot narrow-gauge line envisioned by William Jackson Palmer, the Denver and Rio Grande. Unlike the standard 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge railroads, a narrow gauge was less expensive to build and used smaller equipment that could handle tighter curves and steeper grades. Even then, it would be no picnic building a railroad through the narrow and windy Animas Canyon. But that was the goal, even before Palmer's D&RG reached Durango in 1881. Prior to the railroad, the only way in was via the Animas Canyon Toll Road, and it wasn't exactly the straight and narrow. At its height in 1889, the Denver and Rio Grande narrow gauge system covered over 1,800 miles in Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. But over the next century, most of it was converted to standard gauge or abandoned. Only 2 sections remain of the D&RGW's San Juan extension west of Alamosa. The line over Cumbres Pass between Antonito and Chama was purchased jointly by the states of Colorado and New Mexico in 1970. It became the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. The Silverton branch out of Durango was purchased privately by Charles Bradshaw in 1981, and so was born the Durango and Silverton. Today, it is a part of American Heritage Railways and carries over 200,000 riders annually. The line covers 45.5 miles between Durango and Silverton, and mileposts on the line remain as they were from the early days of the narrow gauge system. Durango is milepost 451.5, and Silverton is 496.7. Each milepost reflects the distance on the timetable from Denver. Although the railroad is oriented in more or less a north-south direction, trains bound for Silverton are traveling timetable west, and back to Durango as eastbound. This is how we will refer to train movements today. Stations include Railroad Park, Home Ranch, Hermosa, Pinkerton, Rockwood, Tacoma, Tall Timber, Cascade Canyon, Needleton, and Elk Park. Water tanks are found at Hermosa, Tank Creek, and Needleton. This is the base of operations for the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. The centerpiece being the turntable and roundhouse, which also contains a steam shop and railroad museum. Opposite the roundhouse, you will find a car shop and a new diesel shop as of 2024. There is also a freight depot and dispatcher's tower. On the east side of the yard stands the historic train depot. First opened in January of 1882, the depot welcomed passengers of the Denver and Rio Grande to its newest railroad town called Durango. And by July of that year, one could travel the newly opened branch line to Silverton, as we will today. This scene is as old as Durango itself. A morning ritual is taking place at the roundhouse and turntable as narrow gauge steam engines are made ready to take a train to Silverton, deep in the San Juan Mountains to the north. A hostler takes engine 476 out of the roundhouse and onto the turntable. It'll be positioned on a ready track for today's crew. In May of 2024, the 476 was used in a film shoot for a Kevin Costner movie. When we arrived in July, it was still somewhat in costume, sporting a diamond stack and box headlight. For the movie, it had been relettered for the Illinois Central. The 476 is an Alco K-28 built for the D&RGW in 1923. Because of their smooth ride and top speed of 40 miles per hour, crews nicknamed the K-28 as the sports model. They hauled passenger express trains throughout the narrow gauge system, most notably the San Juan Express from Hermosa to Durango and the Silverton. 10 K-28s were built, numbered 470 through 479. 7 of the engines were requisitioned by the U.S. Army and sent to the White Pass and Yukon Railroad for service during World War II. The 3 remaining were the 476, 473, and 478. The other 7 K-28s were scrapped by 1946. K-28s are often used as helpers for the uphill climb to Silverton, and that's the case today with the 476. The engine will assist the 493 on today's train. The D&RG originally built a 10-stall roundhouse in 1881. It went through a few modifications over the next century and was tragically destroyed by fire in 1989 with 6 engines inside. The engines were repaired and the roundhouse rebuilt by the Durango and Silverton. It goes without saying, without these facilities, there would be no railroad. Maintaining a railroad that dates back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries requires a facility with the right tools and resources. The Durango Shops are built to handle that very task. It is run by people who have the passion and the skill sets passed down from generations to keep this piece of the old narrow gauge railroad alive. At last check, there are 9 steam locomotives on the Durango and Silverton's roster, most of which were built in the 1920s. The railroad's passenger car fleet is around 40 in number, and there are many restoration projects in the works. Durango has 4 newly acquired diesels from the White Pass and Yukon Railroad in Alaska, which also require maintenance. In addition to maintaining the railroad's own equipment, American Heritage Railways, the company which owns the Durango and Silverton, has begun contracting restoration work for other railroads. One example is this 1881 Baldwin 280. It just arrived from Knott's Berry Farms in Southern California. All of this extra work has left the roundhouse a little crowded. In 2024, a new diesel shop opened for business to free up space in the roundhouse. It is referred to as the Diesel Station. We were given a peek inside the new facility just hours before it would see its first customers. It'll probably never look this clean again. Inside the roundhouse, K-28 number 473 is having some light work done, while a few stalls over, K-36 number 482 is going through an overhaul and a 1,472-day boiler inspection as mandated by the FRA. In another stall, big K-37 number 493 is hot and being readied for today's run. That's the sound of the dynamo, a steam-powered generator which supplies electricity for the engine's lights. The hostler removes the chocks as he prepares to back the 493 out of its stall. .493 is a Baldwin K-37 Class 282. It was originally built as a standard gauge 280 consolidation in 1902 for the Denver and Rio Grande. Its original number was the 1105. In 1928, it was rebuilt as a K-37 type narrow gauge locomotive in D&RGW's Burnham Shops in Denver. The 1105's boiler, tender, and other components were reused, while it received a new frame and running gear, copying the design of the railroad's K-36 type Mikados. The engines have a unique outside frame design, with the driving wheels located inside the chassis frames, while the cylinders, driving rods, counterweights, and valve gear are on the outside. The 493 made its last revenue run for the D&RGW in 1968 and was later placed on static display in Silverton. In 2016, it was moved to Durango to be restored to operating condition. During the restoration process, it was converted to burn oil instead of coal, making it the first of Durango and Silverton's fleet of steam engines to be converted. The engine entered service in 2020. With the engineer and fireman now on board, 476 makes its way to the yard to be coupled to the 493. They will double head today's 463 train to Silverton. The fireman performs a blowdown of the 476's boiler as it backs toward the 493. This removes mineral sediments from the water that accumulates inside the boiler. The engines pass the dispatcher's office as they make their way toward their train. Durango and Silverton trains operate under timetable authority, with scheduled station departures and arrivals governed by the employee timetable. For example, the Silverton Express train number 463 has a 9 a.m. departure out of Durango. It is scheduled to arrive in Silverton at 12:25 p.m., 45 minutes behind mixed train number 461. Keeping track of all the train's progress by radio is the train dispatcher.
Wayne, that's good radio at 8:21 and 47 seconds, over. Understand AD 1609 and oxygen are okay in the 212. Radio code today is 319, over.
Thank you, 463 Alco.
New to the scene in Durango are the railroad's newly acquired diesels from the White Pass and Yukon Railroad in Alaska. They are Montreal Locomotive Works DL535Es, built in 1969. 7 1,200 horsepower diesels were originally built by Alco in Schenectady, New York. However, Alco abruptly shut down its manufacturing operations before the units were completed, so engines 101 through 107 were sent to Montreal for the final touches. You could say these were the last Alco diesels ever built, making them a bit of a novelty. Our cab footage today is shot from engine 106, as we present the railroad to you as seen from the train, from the ground, and from the air. Let's get aboard the 106 as train 461 makes an 8:15 a.m. departure for Silverton. .461 is a mixed train that dates back to the Denver and Rio Grande years. At one time, it was the only scheduled train to Silverton. On a cool October morning, K-28 number 473 gets underway, crossing West College Drive. Departing Durango Yard, the train passes the historic Strater Hotel. Opened in 1887, the Strater has had several notable guests over the last century, including U.S. Presidents John F. Kennedy and Gerald Ford, the Apollo astronauts, and the rock band The Grateful Dead. Will Rogers stayed here, and Western author Louis L'Amour wrote his famous Sackett books while staying here. K-36 number 480 passes the Strater as it runs light to Rockwood to power a work train on a January morning. As we cross the intersection of 14th and Main, we move the clock back to the summer of 1959. Engine 473 leads a mixed train for Silverton through the crossing. Notice the gondola of coal behind the tender. Coal was occasionally delivered to the residents and businesses of Silverton. Coming up on the right, you will see a couple of motor car operators waiting to set on the track behind us. Operated by maintenance of way crew members, motor car patrols follow each train. After crossing the intersection of East 2nd and East 15th, we make our first crossing of the Animas River on a 253-foot bridge. We will cross the Animas River a total of 5 times on our way to Silverton. Mid-October is a popular time to visit Durango, as aspen and cottonwood trees show off their bright gold colors. The elevation here is 6,520 feet, so mornings are usually on the cool side. Engine 473 leads this morning's second express train for Silverton. It appears on the timetable as train 465. Twas just a few nights before Christmas, and the 473 leads a sold-out Polar Express train over the bridge en route to the North Pole, which, if you didn't know, is located just a few miles up the track at Railroad Park. Moving the clock forward to April, K-37 number 493 leads train 261, the winter excursion to Cascade Canyon. The first few miles of the Silverton branch are easy running as trains make their way through the Animas Valley. Here is a view from across the river in January of 2024. K-36 number 481 is in charge of the Cascade Winter Train this morning. It's just a few weeks away from making its final run as a coal-burning engine. As we cross 32nd Street, we enter the old town of Animas City. Founded in 1876, the same year Colorado became a state, the town, which had agricultural roots, thrived until the Denver and Rio Grande began building its own town 2 miles to the south. The D&RG tended to build its own towns as it went, rather than developing existing towns. Because of this, their railroad timetable soon included names like Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Alamosa, Chama, and Durango. Trains pass a Y track at Railroad Park as the line continues through the Animas Valley. Built around 2012, it serves as the North Pole for the railroad's Polar Express trains during the Christmas season. At milepost 457.25, trains pass the siding of Home Ranch. The 1,000-foot siding was built in 1982 to provide the newly formed Durango and Silverton with an additional place to make meets. To build the siding, crews simply drug the main line over and installed switches and a new track between them. Done. The maximum grade at this point is around 1.2% as trains sprint through the valley toward Hermosa. The railroad parallels the busy Highway 550. As we approach milepost 462.5, we cross a bridge over Hermosa Creek and arrive at the station bearing the same name. Here we find one of 2 remaining wood water tanks on the line and a maintenance of way yard. There is also a 475-foot siding on the east side of the rail. This morning's express train number 463 needs a helper to make the hill, so engines 473 and 493 are double-headed. The 473 will cut off at Silverton and return light to Durango. Notice the Rio Grande lettering on 473's tender. Both K-28s had been relettered for an upcoming photo special. The old water tank was strategically placed at the bottom of the heavy grade to Rockwood. The wooden tank was retired years ago in favor of the smaller tank you see here. Building from Durango, the rails reached Hermosa in November of 1881. It was already a town located on the Animas Canyon Toll Road with a post office that operated between 1876 and 1900. A construction camp was located here during the building of the railroad. With diesel number 101 for power, a flanger train returns to Durango after plowing snow in the Animas Canyon. Returning to 1959, photographer Ray Pellet catches the 473 leading its mixed train through Hermosa. After crossing Highway 550, the 2.5% mountain grade begins in earnest. Working solo this time, the big 493 stomps up the hill. Railroaders call this Hermosa Hill, and it takes us above and away from the Animas River. For now, anyway. Here is a line-side shot of our train taken the previous day, just below Pinkerton Siding. "45 minutes later, we find Express Train 463, the steam doubleheader, working hard on the 2.5% grade. Like 461, the 463's history dates back to the D&RGW. This second scheduled train to Silverton began running around 1963 as ridership grew. Pinkerton is a 980-foot siding. Like Home Ranch, it was added in 1982 as an additional passing track that would be needed by the Durango and Silverton. One such meet is about to take place. Engine 480 is powering an afternoon Highline Express to Rockwood and return. The train will take the siding in a meet with train 464 from Silverton. The Highline Express does not appear on the timetable. Trains like this are referred to as extras and indicated as such by the white flags near the number boards. During our visit in July of 2024, it was running a few days per week to handle the extra ridership. A good problem to have. With a switch lined for the siding, the K-36 utilizes its 36,200 pounds of tractive effort to start the train on the mountain grade. In a perfectly timed meet, engine 493 appears around the curve on the main, eastbound for Durango. With the Rockwood train and its motor car in the hole, the switch is realigned for the main so 493 can continue toward Durango without stopping. The siding is located directly above the Pinkerton Hot Springs. This geothermal spring was a major attraction in the late 19th century. Some claimed the soda water emitted by the spring could cure all diseases, and for a time in the 1890s, it was bottled and consumed. Climbing back up the hill, engine 476, decked out in 1970s attire, including a diamond stack, performs a wintertime photo run-by. The railroad continues its 2.5% climb for another 3 miles between Pinkerton and Rockwood. .493 leads its train around a curve and under Highway 550 at milepost 467. The track curves through a heavily wooded area toward a bench railroaders call the Mini High Line. In late 2023 and early 2024, the Colorado State Forest Service out of Durango conducted a fire mitigation project in this timber stand to reduce the fire danger and improve the overall health of the forest. It is mostly ponderosa pine with Rocky Mountain juniper and Gamble oak. The goal was to thin out much of the overcrowding juniper and give the pine and Gamble oak enough room to grow. In this December scene, the Cascade Canyon winter train passes the project site, led by K-36 number 480, dressed for its evening Polar Express runs. You can already see some of the progress made in the stand. The thinning work was done by the Cut-to-Length Division of Miller Timber Services in Oregon. They were kind enough to stage this scene for us as the train passes by. The fire mitigation project was a cooperative effort between the Colorado State Forest Service and private entities, including the Durango and Silverton. By January, a log deck grew along the track, and to get the logs to the mills, they would have to go on the rail to Rockwood, where they could be loaded onto trucks. The railroad provided a special work train for the cause, powered by the former White Pass and Yukon number 101. For a few weeks in early 2024, this Rio Grande narrow gauge line was again hauling freight, and not part of a staged photo excursion. Now, the railroad didn't have to do this, but for one day, just for our cameras, the 480 was steamed up and a crew was called to pull the log train to Rockwood. That's the good people of the Durango and Silverton. A Ponze forwarder operator loads logs onto flat cars fitted with custom-made bunks out of rail. Once loaded, the log train makes the 2-mile trip to Rockwood. Arriving at Rockwood, the logs are unloaded off the siding. Later, they will be put on trucks for local mills. 480 is turned on the Y and set back down the mountain to Durango. Afterward, waiting trucks are loaded. The mitigation project was completed in the spring, and the following summer we passed the job site on the train. This is the site of the former log deck where trains were loaded. This shelf is referred to as the Mini Highline, a taste of more impressive things to come. The line passes above the cool waters of Shalona Lake and below the grave remnants of the 416 fire that raged through the area in 2018. The increase of fire danger in the San Juan Mountains prompted the Durango and Silverton to convert their steam engines from burning coal to oil. The final steam engine was K-36 number 481. It made its last run as a coal burner in early 2024. Out by the turntable sits its tender, with the last load of coal after the engine's final run. The cold 481 sits outside the roundhouse with its side rods removed. 493 gently pulls it inside. The end of an era, but thankfully, not the end of the 481. Although the change isn't always welcome, we are thankful that here in the 21st century, we can still stand trackside and witness a living and breathing remnant of the Denver and Rio Grande narrow gauge. After crossing Highway 250, our 2.5% climb continues for one more mile to the station of Rockwood. The railroad curves high above Shalona Lake at a place referred to by locals as Granite Point. It leads us into a small canyon above Elbert Creek. Outside of the High Line, this is a popular location for photographers, and it's easy to see why. Engine 480 leads a Cascade Canyon excursion train around Granite Point and up the canyon above Elbert Creek. If the light is starting to look a little funny, it is because we are in the middle of a solar eclipse, which took place on October 14th, 2023. Although not a total eclipse here, it was enough to make the world look like a night scene from an old movie, and the temperature dropped enough that you would want a good coat. Both K-28s perform a photo run-by during an event to celebrate their 100th anniversary in 2023. 473 is on the point of a mixed freight, while the 476 serves as a mid-train helper. Back on board train 461, we arrive at the top of the grade to Rockwood, where we will stop to pick up passengers. There is a zip line at Tall Timber and a trailhead at Needleton. Both destinations are only accessible by train. Rockwood has a Y track for turning trains, as well as an 835-foot siding. A post office existed here between 1876 and 1940. The rails arrived at Rockwood in November of 1881, but it wouldn't be until the following summer that the Silverton branch would be completed. The toughest portion of the railroad to be built lies just ahead. .473 climbs out of the blackness of Rockwood Cut as a late October sun casts long shadows over the land. a cold winter morning with a temperature around 10 below Fahrenheit, Engine 101 is fired up to take a flanter train north into the Animas Canyon. Due to the cold, it took 30 minutes of cranking to get the old engine to fire. After making a flag stop, we depart Rockwood for one of the most scenic portions of the railroad, the High Line. The 2.5% grade out of Hermosa subsides for the next few miles as the railroad heads toward a meeting point of the Animas River. Just beyond Rockwood Cut, we are officially welcomed into the San Juan National Forest. Created by President Teddy Roosevelt in 1905, it covers nearly 2 million acres in the San Juan Mountains. Motor cars deserve some screen time too. So here is Motor Car 333 following the train back to Durango. When most people think of the Durango and Silverton, this is what comes to mind: the High Line. As trains approach Horseshoe Curve, we can see where the railroad was blasted into a shelf in the red granite rock, nearly 400 feet above the Animas River. As we gaze at the Animas River way down in the depths of the canyon, we can't help but think of those who dreamed of building a railroad through here, or that such a thing could be built by hand. Yet here it is. The roadbed was blasted into the rocky cliff by hand using black powder, a slow, difficult, and dangerous job at best. It was completed during the winter and early spring of 1882. As we enjoy the incredible view, we hear our train's conductor giving the dispatcher in Durango an update on our progress and a passenger count.
Train 461, dispatcher, over. Dispatcher answering train 461, over. Train 461 departed Rockwood, 9:26, 9:26 a.m. Have a grand total of 261 passengers on board. That breaks down to 167 standard, 83 premium, 9 NINE salt timber, and 2 GWO infants, over. Understand train 461 departed Rockwood at 9:26, 9:26 a.m. with a grand total of 261. 261 on board, which breaks down to 167, 3 NINE, and GWO, over. Understood, break 461 dispatcher, that was all correct. Thanks, 461 out.
Motorcar operators have to have one of the best jobs on the Silverton Bridge. They seem to have this incredible line all to themselves. Check out this view. The High Line ends at a crossing of the Animas River called High Bridge. Originally built as a wooden deck truss, it was replaced in 1894 with the current iron structure you see today. The bridge was reinforced in 1981 to handle the heavier K-36 and K-37 locomotives that would be used on the Durango and Silverton. This is the second crossing of the Animas River. The third crossing is little over 5 miles ahead. Milepost 472.3 puts us at Tacoma, a flag stop on the railroad, and the location of the Tacoma Power Plant, which went online in 1905 to serve mines in the area. It is still in operation today, supplying power for the cities of Durango, Silverton, and the Purgatory Ski Area. In this sequence from 2023, Engine 481 powers the Cascade Canyon winter train through Tacoma. Our K-28 photo special stops through Tacoma. Tacoma is a 22-car siding, and that's where we find our photo special, which is down for the Cascade Canyon Express. The Animas Canyon has an unlimited number of picturesque locations, most of which are only accessible by train. Between Tacoma and Wilderness are the repeating curves, and you can guess how they got their name. One of our favorite scenes from the K-28 100th anniversary photo excursion was shot right here. Continuing up the line, we enter a small park, which was once the Awe Wilderness Dude Ranch. Between 1952 and 1985, visitors would come here to get away from it all. This would be a good place to do it since your transportation choices were foot, horseback, or train. We'll stick with the latter. At milepost 474.6, we find the Tank Creek water tank. Although not as photogenic as the Hermosa or Needleton tanks, this former tank car gets the job done. The original wood tank was removed by the D&RGW in late 1966. Our next flag stop is the 180-acre Tall Timber Resort at milepost 475.3. The attraction? Soaring treetop adventures. Families can spend the day ziplining through the trees and even over the Animas River. And since the railroad is the only way in, riding the Durango and Silverton is yet another perk to this popular zip line, which first opened in 2004. Since this is a remote location and the best view is from the front of the train, let's continue aboard the 106. While the Animas River provided the logical course for the railroad to reach Silverton, it does have some drawbacks, mainly flooding. You will notice several places along the river where the railroad has been reinforced, realigned, or rebuilt after floods washed out portions of the line. Here at roughly milepost 476.5, the roadbed has been reinforced with cribbing and a cement wall after a flood in 1970. Referred to as Cement Wall, this is a popular place for photo run-bys like this. Climbing back on board, we see the canyon begin to widen as we near a place where Cascade Creek meets the Animas River. This is the location of Cascade Canyon. At milepost 477.5, we find the Cascade Canyon Y. This was another addition to the Silverton branch at the start of the Durango and Silverton. When Charles Bradshaw first bought the railroad from the D&RGW in 1981, he wanted to be able to run trains year-round. Since the steep canyon to the north is prone to snowslides, a Y-track was added here so trains could return to Durango. On July 11, 1982, a ceremony was held at Cascade Canyon, complete with a brass band in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Silverton branch. Photographer Ray Pellet captured this home movie of the event, with owner Charles Bradshaw unveiling a plaque honoring the railroad and the spirit of Colorado mountain railroading. To this very day, you can see the plaque mounted next to the main line. At milepost 477.8, we make our third crossing of the Animas River via the Teft Bridge. The through truss span was built in 1877 and moved here in 1911. The green steel bridge span was built in 1972. A sign near milepost 478 notes the former Teft Spur, named for Guy Teft, an early forest ranger. A large sawmill was built near the mouth of Cascade Creek in the 1890s to produce timbers and railroad ties for the Denver and Rio Grande, as well as the Silverton Northern Railroad. Before the railroad came, this was a way station on the Animas Canyon Toll Road named Nakora. It even had a short-lived post office that was opened for just 134 days in 1877. In 1878, Silverton residents William C. Bowen and his wife built a small ranch and a way station for travelers along the toll road. When the D&RG purchased a right-of-way through their property in 1880, the couple moved back to Silverton, isolated from the rest of the world, except for these rails. What a beautiful place this would have been to call home. Here is the view from the other side of the rail. The two mountain peaks on the horizon are Pigeon Peak and Turret Peak, both nearly 14,000 feet high. Our K-28 Centennial excursion train puts on a good show as it rounds a curve near milepost 480.5. Here is the scene looking the opposite direction, as 476 does the honors. And because we can, let's repeat the scene in the fall. Both K-28s work upgrade toward Needleton. As we approach the Needleton flag stop, we see a footbridge crossing over the Animas River. This is a wilderness access point where hikers and mountain climbers gain access to the Chicago Basin and the high peaks of the Needle Mountains. Known as the Needle Creek Trail, it originates at the old mining camp of Needleton and follows an old stage road through the rugged and beautiful wilderness. This is our busiest flag stop on today's run. Some hikers come for the day and catch this train on its southbound run back from Silverton. Others choose to camp in the rugged backcountry for days. They can flag down the train here or at Elk Park. As the train gets underway, let's hike a little ways up the track. 45 minutes behind the diesels is the doubleheader, this time with both K-28s for power. As the train arrives at Needleton Siding, we again take our seat in the 106. Needleton is a 715-foot-long siding located at milepost 484. It was built in 1927 after the original siding was washed away in a flood. The old siding was nearly 2 miles south, or railroad east of here. A motor car waits patiently for us in the siding. It is en route back to Hermosa after inspecting the line to Silverton. The morning patrol ensures the track is clear before any passenger train departs the depot. Another highlight of the route is the 50,000-gallon Needleton water tank. In 1973, the D&RGW retired it and wanted to tear it down, but efforts were made to save it. The tank was later restored by volunteers, with help from the Durango and Silverton and the Colorado Historical Society. Just like Hermosa and Tank Creek, an old 6,000-gallon tank car body serves as the current water tank and is located about 200 feet up the track. We spent the day at the Needleton tank after being dropped off by a motor car. If you are looking for a remote place with just the river for company, this will do nicely. We are now 2.5 hours from Durango by train and 1 hour away from Silverton. Somewhere above us is Water Tank Canyon and the old toll road that once connected Silverton with Animas City. We've got plenty of time before our next train, so let's take in the scenery for a while. Sounds like we have a hot rail. Probably the helper returning light from Silverton. Yep, it's the 473. And it looks like they're taking a bad order car back with them. Maybe they'll stop here and take on water. Or maybe not. Actually, they watered here this morning. The next day, we rode the 476 helper back from Silverton, and it stopped. It's a quick stop, and soon we are underway again. Well, that's it for the trains for the day, and it's starting to sprinkle, so let's jump back on the 106 and continue upstream. In June of 2024, a few weeks before we shot these scenes, a massive mudslide came down the flank of the Needle Mountains, burying the railroad under tons of debris. Fortunately, it happened in the evening and no trains were on the line. The mudslide was triggered by thunderstorms. A slow order is in place while work continues on the slide. We admire the large pile of debris the storm brought down the mountain as we contemplate that innocent-looking cloud on the horizon. How quickly it can grow into a storm capable of damage like this. The railroad passes through many slide zones in the canyon, This is one of the reasons why the tracks are patrolled each day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
476 has the high ball between Needleton and Elk Park. The train is followed by the 473 with a passenger section on the return trip to Durango. Just below mile marker 490, we make the fourth crossing of the Animas River on a 222-foot bridge. To our left is the older alignment and a through truss bridge which the Denver and Rio Grande Western abandoned in 1964 after the structure had been weakened by spring runoffs. Part of the old main line has been left as a short spur. A water tender resides there in case it is needed. Our final flag stop of the journey is Elk Park. Hikers, backpackers, and fishermen use this stop during the summer months for access to the Needle Mountains. The narrow gauge highway of hand-hewn timber and steel arrived in Elk Park in June of 1882. The goal was to make Silverton by the 4th of July. This Y-track was installed in 1884 so trains could be turned if snowslides blocked the canyon north of here. And there are more than a few snowslide zones. At one time, Elk Park had a section house and a bunkhouse, along with stock pens for loading sheep onto the rail. But those structures are long gone. Just railroad west of the Y-track is an 885-foot siding. Our westbound photo special takes the siding for a meet with an eastbound for Durango. Actually, we are down for two eastbounds. The first is Diesel 107, which served as a helper for Train 463. Since both K-28s were tied up with today's photo charter, the freshly repainted White Pass and Yukon motor got to log some miles on the Silverton branch. .493 leads its passenger train through the golden Colorado countryside back to Durango. The passengers were told that a sizable group of us were standing trackside with our cameras, and they give us a nice greeting and take a few pictures as they pass. As we continue towards Silverton, the scenery continues to amaze. Passing this pond, the railroad is intersected by the old Colorado Trail. It runs through the mountains for 475 miles between Denver and Durango. It appears as a footpath to our left. From the path, we view 476 heading eastbound from Silverton. From a footbridge where the Colorado Trail crosses the river, we get this shot of the 473 heading eastbound from Silverton. Here is another view from the trail. At milepost 491.7, an unassuming bridge marks the location of Whitehead Gulch. At one time, the railroad had a water spout for thirsty steam engines after a water tank near Silverton was removed in 1924. Today, there is no evidence of this spout. A flood in 1970 most likely is to blame for that. From a hillside near Whitehead Gulch, we have a great view of the trains working through the narrow canyon. Continuing up the canyon past Whitehead Gulch, we pass the site of a former snow shed at milepost 492.5. Two snow slides converge at this point, so in 1890, the D&RG built a 330-foot shed to protect the track. The original shed was destroyed by fire in 1917 and replaced with a 400-foot shed, which is also long gone except for a few timbers and the base of a concrete wall along the track. Here is another view of the engine we have been riding as the 106 and 101 lead their train back to Durango. They came north this morning as train 461 on the timetable and now return south as train 462. Visiting the Animas Canyon is an experience you really can't put on the screen and do it justice. If we had to describe it with one word, it wouldn't be grand or spectacular or breathtaking. It would be better to simply say, this is Colorado. Near Kendall Gulch, we find the remains of an ore tipple and boiler, evidence of one of the many mines once active in the area. We are almost out of the canyon, but not before the railroad bends around a tight curve below Cataract Gulch. Water cascades down the vertical rock face and into the narrow confines of the canyon. It was country like this that prompted William Jackson Palmer to build the Denver and Rio Grande as a narrow gauge railroad. Another one of our favorite scenes is found looking back through the canyon as 473 and 493 double head for Silverton. As we exit the canyon, we cross the Animas River one final time. This footage was shot in July of 2024, and at that time, a new bridge had just been completed over the river. The 100-year-old timber bridge was in need of repairs, and the railroad considered its options. In the end, it came to the same conclusion the D&RGW had reached at Twin Bridges. In the long term, replacing was better than repairing. The previous fall, we had visited the line while construction was underway on the new bridge. The river channel had been partially diverted for the project as we caught this scene of Big 493 eastbound for Durango. Not far from the crossing are the remains of the Champion Mine No. 1, which produced copper sulfide, silver, and zinc. A spur track once ran to the mine, but was removed in 1924. Here is another view of the old bridge taken from Highway 550 as Engine 480 leads its train to Silverton. Since leaving Durango, the railroad has gained over 2,700 feet in elevation. Here, the valley floor rests at the 9,300-foot level. The mountains surrounding the town are all over 13,000 feet, the highest being Storm Peak at 13,487. As it arrives at Silverton, train 463 passes the 461, which has already dropped off its passengers and is waiting on the Y track to turn around. Situated in a valley along the Animas, the town was originally called Baker's Park. The first mining claims were made in these mountains in 1860, near the end of the Colorado Gold Rush. Although it was one of the richest gold-producing areas in Colorado, it was the rich silver deposits that put Baker's Park on the map. Miners bragged that they found silver by the ton, and that name stuck. The Denver and Rio Grande wanted to have the rails reach Silverton by the 4th of July, 1882. By June 27th, Residents heard the distant whistle of a work train for the first time as track layers advanced toward Silverton. It is said the first train actually didn't arrive until July 8th. The last mine closed back in 1992, but the town gets a seasonal boost from the same commodity that powers the railroad: tourism. The town has a population of 622. Between May and October, it more than doubles when the trains arrive. The shops and restaurants on Main Street are abuzz, but only for a few hours each day, as trains have a 2-hour layover before returning to Durango. While passengers enjoy a meal, railroaders are busy turning trains on the Y and servicing their engines for the return trip. Out on the Y, helper number 476 has just cut off its train and makes preparations for its return trip to Durango. The crew takes time to service the engine, while the 493 backs its train toward the end of track, where passengers will again board for the return trip.
Okay, that's track 30, number 15, 15 to the 476. CNE, south extra beginning at 1:45 p.m. Travel from Silverton to Durango ending at 5:09 p.m. That is ahead of train 462, engine 106, and you are to run 15 minutes ahead of the 462's timetable.
With a track warrant issued by the dispatcher, the 476 departs for Durango at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes ahead of train 462. Engine 480 starts train 462 back toward Durango at 2 p.m. Right on time. Just like clockwork, at 2:45 p.m., train 464 follows suit behind the 493. When the final train departs, the old mining town high up in Colorado San Juans is quiet once again. At least until tomorrow's first train arrives. For nearly a century and a half, the Silverton branch has remained in continuous operation as a narrow gauge railroad, a tradition kept alive by the people of the Durango and Silverton. We hope you've enjoyed this program, and we invite you to take one of the greatest train rides in the world. And as always, until next time, thanks for watching.